So to do a little bit from what we did yesterday, and then to relate that with important stanzas, you have the handout here. And someone actually asked me what the two stanzas are if I present them. So they are here in this this handout. Okay, so let me see. In the second stanza, the one that is distributed today, in the second stanza it says, Bhikkhuni Vajra said in Fundamental Behavior Sutra, so this is Sutra, it says, a mind is demonic, which views a true self. You have a wrong view. These compositional aggregates are empty. There is no living being in them. And so what is being said here is that objectively there is no living being in them. So the belief that the self exists, the belief that the self exists as right intact there from the object side is the demonic mind. Then the fourth stanza, which we did already earlier, which is like the foundation of the four sessions we did earlier, Arya Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom of the middle way, which says that through ceasing karma and afflictions, nirvana is achieved. Karma and afflictions arise from distorted conceptions or conceptual misperception. These arise from elaborations of grasping a true existence of self and others. Elaborations here referring to the grasping of true existence or the ignorance seized by emptiness, by the wisdom of emptiness, or sees into emptiness. So there are two versions. Now, yesterday we were doing the Mahatma Gandhi's picture and the dots, you know. Okay, so if you can see there, the second last stanza in the same on the same page, Arya Nagarjuna's precious garland. So there, if the person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not also consciousness, and not all of them, where's the person out of those? Okay, so in your meditation, what we're supposed to be doing is, you know, if possible, just see if you could sit yourself, you know, doing just a separate, you know, allocate or keep a separate time for that meditation on emptiness. So how do you go about doing it? Is that, you know, if you're able to do that, then keep at least about 10 to 15 minutes just for that meditation. In which case you know, sit comfortably cross-legged, but the cross-legged is not really the indispensable the requirement. Two things are what we can't compromise. Cannot be compromised. So what are they? Back upright. You know, back upright. This is what we cannot compromise. You can't really sit like this, you know, or leaning, you know, or like this. No. So always during the meditation, the back upright, particularly in the formal meditation, back upright, and eyes, never close your eyes. There are occasions, you know, somewhere in the very advanced level of practice, you know, there, when I'm very much used to the practice of meditation in a very qualitative way, then at one point there are situations or, you know, parts of practices where you have to keep your eyes closed. But this is something very exceptional. For the beginners, it's a great hindrance to your, you know, progress of the meditation. So always keep your eyes, you know, in a very natural state of openness. Don't keep it wide open. Don't keep it completely, you know, closed. Just keep it half open like this, right? Then in terms of the hand gesture, it's fine. If you can do it, it's well and good. If not, don't be too bothered about it. Don't be too, you know, don't be worried about it as much. So the two things which cannot be compromised are the eyes should not be closed, number one, and the back always keep upright. And then as you do the meditation, what happens is that, you know, over time you come to sense that, you know, when your backs are like this, bent or leaning, then the mind is not clear. This is what you can sense, you know. And why? you know, the physical body, when your body gets, you know, upright, what happens is that the energy channel within your body gets upright. When the energy channel becomes upright, then the flow of the energy becomes so soothing and smooth. When the, you know, the energy that flows in the channels, you know, they corresponds, you know, they go along with the mind. So the mind which you're going to use for meditation, and the energy that flows in the channels, they are so closely tied to one another. When the energy gets stuck or rigid, then the mind also gets rigid and stuck and dull. Whereas when the energy flows so, you know, smoothly, then the mind which accompanies that as well becomes so smooth, fresh, and alert. Right. So this is the difference. And actually, over time, you are going to be the one who is going to experience that. You can sense it, right, through one's own personal experience. Okay. So this is one thing: the back upright and eyes never close it. When you have your eyes closed, at first, the meditation seems to be so exciting, it's so nice. But then the graph will grow like this. At first, you know, when you do no meditation, it's like this. As soon as you do meditation with eyes closed, it's wonderful. It simply shoots up like this, meditation. And then, you know, over 1 month, 2 months, what happens is that, you know, then it'll go down. This is the graph, right? So then no progress at all. It's very dangerous. And then when you start doing meditation, you know, with your eyes open, you find it so difficult. So right from the beginning, always make sure to do it with your eyes open. Of course, it's very challenging at the start, but then over time you will sense that this is such an excitement. There's such a freshness in it with eyes open. Okay, so now look. The second last stanza, Arya Nagarjuna's Precious Garden, says, if the person is not earth, not water, and so forth, what he's trying to do is that last time when we were doing the, you know, deconstructing the picture of Mahatma Gandhi, we see that they are simply the dots, right? And the dots are not the picture of Mahatma Gandhi, right? Simply we find the dots. In a like manner, you know, so this is such a kind of picturesque example that I'm giving you. Now you should be able to relate that to a finer objects, like yourself, you know, the Mahatma Gandhi, yourself like the picture of the Mahatma Gandhi, and what constitutes your, you know, the parts should be imagined like the dots that constitute Mahatma Gandhi's picture, right? So here you think about, you know, so basically when you look at your body, when you look at yourself in the sense of your mind, we see that you have the body, you know, the solid, the bones, the flesh, and so forth. So these are the earth element. And then whereas we have the blood flowing, blood within you, you know, so I can't, you know, actually I want to, you know, share something with you, but it's so repulsive to think of, you know, I don't want to think about it anymore. Okay, so the thing is that we have blood inside. So say when you want to do make blood donation, so the blood is extracted out of you. So the what is being extracted out of you is blood, and it's not you. You know, because if the blood, what is being extracted, if that is you, then it should be coming out from your hand. That's not the case, right? So this blood that constitutes your body, you know, one of the parts of your body, it is the water element, right? So we have the earth element, water element, and then if you touch your body, you sense that it has heat. This is the fire element, and likewise we survive through, you know, oxygen that we breathe in and breathe out. So the air that we breathe in, breathe out, it is the element of air. Right. And then our body, if you look at with a very fine electron microscope, we see that our body is constituted more of the space rather than the particles, you know. So it's like almost like 90% space and just 10%, even less, of the solid things. So more of your body is actually constituted of space, just empty space. So those things, you know, which are there in between the particles, which constitute your body. So these are referred to as the space element, right? And the mind that we have outside the body, which means the body is something tangible and the mind is non-tangible. So the mind which drives your actions and so forth, this is the element of consciousness. So, other than these six, we have nothing there. Other than these different dots, there's no picture of Mahatma Gandhi. You take about, the first dot, is that a picture of Mahatma Gandhi? No, there's a picture of Hitler, right? So, I'm looking for the picture of Mahatma Gandhi. I'm not looking for the picture of Hitler. I'm very repulsive of his attitudes. Okay, you take away all the pictures of, what you dislike. There's a picture of Hitler. So the first dot, you take it away because this is not a picture of Mahatma Gandhi. Is it or is it not? That is not. Take it away. Likewise, say, imagine there are, thousands of these dots. Take away all the dots which are not a picture of Mahatma Gandhi. So what is left behind? Even the picture of Mahatma Gandhi, which you earlier saw from distance, even that disappears. Right. So it indicates that even the picture of Mahatma Gandhi, so by no means this is different from these dots, individual dots. Right. And none of these dots is the picture of Mahatma Gandhi. Picture of Mahatma Gandhi is a symbol of such peace and non-violence. You look at it and there's a tremendous joy coming in you, sense of intimacy coming in you. Whereas you look at the dots, the picture of Hitler, he has such an air of arrogance, such an air of superiority, rudeness. So none of these pictures is a picture of Mahatma Gandhi. And if you take out all these dots, there's no picture of Mahatma Gandhi left behind. So where is the picture of Mahatma Gandhi? So this is the issue. Likewise, you should be able to relate this with everything else. With yourself, you are constantly, just as we have given the analogy of the dots constituting the picture of Mahatma Gandhi. In a like manner, we are actually in place of dots, we are constituted of, so there are different ways of looking at it. One way of looking at it, one way of doing the analysis is breaking this, reducing, deconstructing the self in the form of the different elements. Just as we broke down the picture of Mahatma Gandhi in the form of the different dots, we break ourselves into different elements. So what are the different elements? The body, the bones, the flesh that we have is the earth element. Is that you? Is that you? If that is you, then somehow, I don't know, when you have heart transplantation, you're being changed. You're going somewhere else. And when your arm is amputated, or you're being amputated, you're gone. But this is not the case. So you said, oh, I lost my arm, but you're not lost, you are there, which means that your arm is not you. So from this reason, we see that none of these earth element, which forms a part of you is you. Okay, keep that aside. Now the second one is the blood that we have. All the blood that we have. So this is also not you. As I said earlier, when somebody draws blood from your body, the blood is getting out, and you are not saying that, oh, I'm getting out of my hand, which means that while the blood comes out of your hand, but you are not coming out of your hand, which means that the blood is not you. The liquid or the water element is not you, right? So we are constituted of the earth element, water element, and the body heat. The body heat is also not you, the element of fire, because the heat pervades your body, and it's not that you pervade your body. You are what someone can see, but heat is what someone can't see, right? He has to experience it. It's not that he or she can see the heat, right? So therefore, it's not the element of fire is not the self or the person. Then the air that you breathe in and breathe out. Also, you are not inhaling yourself. You are inhaling the air. So the air is not you, right? So you get into your lungs. The air gets into the lungs, your lungs, but you're not getting into the lungs. It is you who is inhaling and exhaling, right? So the element of air is not you. Likewise, the space. The space. When somebody looks at you, you are a solid person. You are not space, empty, right? Whereas the space connotes emptiness. Space connotes, the emptiness of tangibility. Right. So you are not the space, but you are constituted of so many major portion of the space. And then the mind also. You are not the mind. So anyone who can tell me or share with me why your mind is not you. So this is a great question that comes to us. Anyone who can help me to convince that the mind is not you. Of course, the other elements, earth, fire, water, air, and the space. So these 5 elements, we are pretty confident that none of these is the self or the person. Then what about the element of the consciousness or the mind? So is that the self or not? This is the question. So anyone who can tell me in support of, it is easy to say, oh, the mind is you. Easy to say that. It is so difficult to say it is not. So is there anyone who can, face the challenge?
I think, therefore I am.
Okay, so you think that mind is you?
No, there is a famous this thing. I think, therefore I am.
Say it again.
I think, therefore I am.
I think, therefore I am. So what does it mean? Does it mean that the mind is you or not?
Yeah, it means because I am thinking.
Okay. So the mind is you. To say mind is you is very easy. I want someone to tell me and prove me, convince me that the mind is not the self.
You can see the mind, the thoughts coming, arising and falling. You are not seen. You are the seer.
That's also a good point. Anyone else? So, yes.
We are calling my mind.
Yes.
When we call my dog, I am not the dog. So when I calling my mind, I am not the mind.
Okay. So when you say, oh, it is my mind, it is my. This is also a very strong point. When you say it is my mind, so you are like the possessor, and the mind is like the possession, to be possessed, right? So how can you say that I'm my I? You'll simply say, oh, it is my mind, it is my body, it is my house. So you are like the possessor, or the appropriator, or the possessor, and the mind will say, oh, this is my pen, or this is my book, this is my small notebook, which means this is also to be possessed or appropriated. And who possesses it? It is me. I'm the possessor, and this is possessed. So likewise, my mind becomes possessed, and I become the possessor, right? So from this, we see that this is, not really one. These were different. Very good point. But when you say, I go to the next life, from Buddhist perspective, it is your mind which goes to the next life. And if, in fact, within Buddhism, there are great number of scholars, highly evolved scholars, who believe that the mind is the self. And a very strong, the proponent of this belief is a great master, Bhavaviveka. And his writings, they're just remarkable. It's so logical and philosophical, and he is actually a Madhyamika philosopher, but he follows the second level of Madhyamika's forward. Also Tantric Madhyamika. So he said that, oh, the mind is the self, because I take the journey to the next life, or in other words, I reincarnate in my next life. And it's actually the mind which reincarnates, therefore the mind is the self. This is what he said. This is his argument against the belief that the mind is not self. Okay, so anyone else who can say that, who can think of reasons to
the mind changes. It is a collection of thoughts, it's a collection of actions. So something that keeps changing like that doesn't seem to conform to an idea of I or me or identity.
Very strong point, but I don't know whether it supports it or I don't know. So because just as the mind is changing, the self is also changing. 30 years ago, I was a young boy. Now, I'm no more a young boy. I is changing. Just as the mind is also changing, the I is also changing.
But it is the mind that is responsible for all karmic actions.
Yes.
it's very difficult to say you're not the mind in a sense, because those karmic actions
Absolutely,
lead
yeah.
to the stream of consciousness
Absolutely.
which carries on to your next life.
Absolutely. So, when I think of how the mind is the self, seems like there are many points, but we don't know whether they are really 100%, strong points to support the mind to be the self. But to say the mind itself is relatively easier. Yes.
Many times mind will have thoughts which will be tormentful, and that torment is not experienced, that is experienced by self.
Okay.
So there is a self which
Okay,
experiences.
so the mind doesn't experience the torments?
The mind is what creates the torments, and the self is what is experiencing the torments.
Okay, but no. The mind
happiness.
creates the torments and the mind experiences the torments. Yes, no.
The self
The first moment, okay, I don't argue saying that, or I'm not rejecting the idea that the self is experiencing the torments. Just as the mind is the creator of the torments, the self also creates the torments. Just as the self experiences the torments, the mind also experiences the torments.
Perhaps, but that means self and mind are different.
How? So from that point of view, if you can equate the two, just as the mind creates a problem, the self also creates a problem. So this is more in line with saying that the mind is the self. Whereas if you can make a distinction where the mind is the creator and the self is not, then we say that, oh, look, the mind is not the self. Because the mind is the creator, and if the mind is the self, then just the mind should be the creator. We should be able to say that that mind, which is the self, is the creator.
Yeah, it happens that way because.
So if that is the case, then you are in support of the mind being the self.
Many times self tells the mind, don't do this, or stop thinking.
I don't know.
But
this
mind
is
cannot
correct.
stop thinking. So,
in you, as a self, what, for example, say, just tell me what I'm doing. I'm writing. Am I writing? I'm really writing something. I've written my name on it. If you don't believe, I'll show it to you. I'm not pretending. What did I do? I wrote something. Did I write something? Don't say no later. Did I write something?
Yes.
Yes. If you don't believe, I'll show that to you. Right, I wrote something. In actuality, it is mine. It is my hand which wrote it. This small piece which wrote, is that me? If this is me, there should be another me here. There should be two me's, two selves. One says one does like this and one does like this, opposite. So there should be two opposite selves, but it's not the case. So actually, what I'm doing is it is my hand which is writing it, but because my hand is writing it, we can rightly say, we can rightly posit that I'm doing it. Don't say that, oh, it's my hand writing it, I'm relaxing. Don't say like that. Right. When your head is busy, you are busy.
But
Right.
it's also the mind that motivates the hand to write.
Okay, now likewise, when your mind is very smart, physically you are resting, your mind is really thinking about a whole lot of things. Are you planning all these things? Yes, no? Yes. Actually, it is your mind which is doing it. Right. So we see that, whatever you do, whatever you think, somehow that is done in relation to the body or the mind. And other than these two, there is no separate self. Other than the dots, there is no separate Mahatma Gandhi's picture. Right. And it is not confined to the Mahatma Gandhi's picture. It is common to everything that exists, including the Buddha. There is nothing which is, which stands apart from the different constituents which constitute that entity. Right. So the self is no exception. The self, it does exist. I'm not saying that it does not exist. The self does exist, but it exists in dependence on your hand, on your body, and on your mind. Just as the picture of Mahatma Gandhi does exist, simply in dependence on these, many dots. And none of these dots is the picture of Mahatma Gandhi. Taken aside, away from all these dots, there is no separate picture of Mahatma Gandhi. So where is the picture of Mahatma Gandhi? This is simply a mental imputation that comes to your mind on the basis of these dots. So likewise, a self, the person that you are seeing next to you, it exists simply on the basis of your mental perception, based on dependence on the different constituents, the 6 constituents of the person, the 6 elements of the person. Other than that, there is no separate self. It's so clear. When your hand is busy writing something, you said, I'm writing it. This hand is not you. But you can't deny the fact that when your hand writes, you say that you're writing it. And when I place the cup on the top leg of the table is not the table. But I put it on the top leg of the table, which is a part of the table, and it is perfectly right to say that I place this cup on the table. I don't have to qualify, on the top leg of the table. I don't have to say that. I can right away say that I place it on the table. While the top leg of the table on which I put it is not the table, but it is, the table is designated simply a metal construct, a metal appearance, perception taking place on the basis of the top leg of the table and the 4 legs of the table. That's it. Other than that, we don't have a separate table. Right. Okay. So now, in your meditation, with your eyes open, not wide open, just half open like this, then with your back upright, these two are, you cannot really compromise. These two, you have to be very strict with that. Otherwise, with your legs on the chair, you sit on the chair or cross-legged or sitting very comfortably, or, with your hands like this or in this posture, or anything is fine. And, the breathing, very natural. Keep your body very flexible, natural. Don't really, push and make it stiff. Okay, so with that, then analyze, think about a picture of Mahatma Gandhi and what constitutes this picture of Mahatma Gandhi, the dots. So like this, you are constituted of these dots in the form of the 6 elements. So none of these 6 elements is you, So none of these 6 elements, the earth element, water element, fire element, air element, space element, the consciousness element, none of these 6 elements is you. And taking aside all these, there is no separate self, remaining behind. So where's the self? Then you see that earlier what you see as a very concrete self, it disappears. So this, for time being, in loose sense, we say, that it disappears. The earlier version of the self disappears. You only end up seeing these, different elements, and none of these elements is the self. And besides these elements, there is no self. So the earlier version of the self, which appeared to your mind so strongly, and you believed, which you believed to be something so solid as I, it disappears. But that disappearance, that emptiness, that voidness of the self, then you abide your mind in that state for a while. Abide your mind in that state for a while. That voidness of the earlier version of the self, So this is like laying an imprint of your mind on the ultimate nature of the self. Right, just do that. And then as, yesterday Dharma was asking, then what about those, constitutions, those dots? They are left behind. Do they exist objectively? Yes.
Repeat what you just said. Sorry.
Okay, so in your meditation, what you do is that, first you recite the stanza. If the person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, also not consciousness, and not all of them, where is the person out of those? Outside, outside. Just recite the stanza and then reflect, what am I really constituted of? So what exactly you are doing is going too close towards the picture of the Mahatma Gandhi. So what happened to you earlier? From distance you saw the picture of the Mahatma Gandhi. When you go too close towards this, what happens? What happens to the picture of Mahatma Gandhi?
There's a distortion.
It disappears. And what is left behind? What are you seeing then? Simply the dots. So likewise, now with this analysis, what you are trying to do is that as though like you are going too close towards the picture of the Mahatma Gandhi, you are going too close towards yourself. And then just as the picture of Mahatma Gandhi disappears when you go too close towards it, likewise the sense of self disappears when you go too close towards yourself. And what is left behind is the 6 elements. You know, the earth element, which is your bones and the flesh and these things, and then the water element, which is the blood inside you. You know, the heart pumping the blood, you know, out, and the veins bringing the blood inside you towards the heart and so forth. And then you breathe in and out the air, you know, through the lungs. Then you have the space, you know. If you look at from the electron microscope, you see that your body is simply constituted of the space, not really with the particles. Particles are so small as compared with the space occupied by the space element. And then what about the mind? Even mind is not self, because when you say, I'm boy or I'm male, it doesn't mean that your mind is male. The maleness or the femaleness is distinguished on the basis of your body, you know. So the mind cannot be described as male or female. It is you who can be described as male and female, you know. So, which means that the mind is not you, right? So, there's...
Even the mind.
Yeah, even the mind is not the self.
No. In society,
Yeah.
right from childhood you are socialized
Absolutely.
in a particular manner. But if you are male, you don't, you know, you should be interested in cars and planes. And little boys are given different things to play with, and little girls are given different things to play with. So as you grow older, of course, now everybody is having unisex dressing. But in my generation, girls dress differently. Even now, girls, I mean,
Earrings.
ladies wear earrings, but not
But nowadays even the boys do that.
yeah, also. So you know.
The young boys, yeah.
Yeah, but what happens is that you get a sense of self which is your female.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you
Yeah.
have a
Absolutely, this is the point. A sense of self created by the conventions. So yesterday we were talking about, you know, things existing simply on the level of convention. Beyond that, if you think there is something beyond that, you don't find anything. So you have to respect the convention, you know. So the convention says that I'm boy, and you are, you know, female. So like that, you know, male, female, these are all, you know, set up with a perfect standard. Okay, let me go ahead. So now, you know, like that. Yes.
Sorry. If I said I was honest, then am I describing myself?
I see. Good. Very good question. So say, oh, I'm so honest. I don't tell lie. Right. So this quality, the characterization of the self, honesty. So is that attributed? Is that associated with the mind or with the body? Is this your question?
But the self, I don't, sorry, I still don't understand how the mind is separate from the self. It seems to me that...
Not the separate in the sense, you know. So therefore it is said, this is what I have here. It's not really so good a translation. Okay, it's good, it's good. So it says, you know, the second last stanza, the last fourth line of the second last stanza. Where is the person out of those, or where is the person beside these 6 elements? You know, beside these 6 elements means that the self is neither separate from these. None of these is the self. Do you agree with me or not?
Yes.
So at least the mind, for the time being, there's complication, you know. But with the earth element, water element, none of these, you know, is the self. Do you agree with me or not? This is very clear, right? And then you take aside all the 6 elements, and is there a separate self left? No. So which means the self is not different from these elements as well, right? So just as yes.
Then how is the mind not the
self?
self? The way you described it, it
Okay.
seems like the mind is a tool that helps the self perceive things or understand
Absolutely,
things like
absolutely.
Then,
Yeah. My hand is the tool for me to write something.
okay.
But it doesn't mean that my hand is me.
But then that adds...
Similarly, my mind, I use it as a tool to view everything, perceive everything, and let other things arise. But it doesn't mean that this mind is me. You're
But
getting
that
it?
adds
Think of this hand. Okay, this is very useful analogy. Okay, yes, over there.
I think this goes in the direction of what he was saying. But
Yes.
just because you perceive that you use your mind doesn't mean you're using your mind. It's just that your mind, you have the impression that you're separate from your mind. You say
have
my
impression.
mind, but
Absolutely, yeah.
But actually, you know, in neuroscience terms, you are your mind, and it's a misconception in that sense.
Actually,
same as when you feel hunger, you feel it here.
If
but
it is
actually it's in your mind.
if it is a neuroscientist perspective, that you are the mind, and they would go even worse. They would say the brain is the mind. If they say, I'm not surprised when they say the brain is mind, whereas I would be surprised if they say the brain is the self. They don't say that. In fact, the neuroscientists, they come to the conclusion, not all, very advanced neuroscientists, one of the neuroscientists, very famous. So he came to the conclusion that nowhere in the brain there is a locality, which is like the central self, central controller. This is what has been found. Right. Okay. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that, so interestingly, just for your information, that was about, that was in 2005, how many years ago? Almost 5-6 years ago. There was one Indian scientist, and his field of research is very interesting. It's neuroscience plus quantum mechanics. So nowadays there's a merging of the two, explaining the workings of the neurons on the basis of the principle of the quantum mechanics. If you don't include the principle of the quantum mechanics, then the working of the neurons cannot be explained completely. So therefore, they have to merge the two disciplines together. So, and he wrote a letter to the office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Oh dear Dalai Lama, he wrote like this: I'm so curious to know about the self. And nowhere in the contemporary science you find the mention of, the self as something so satisfactory, something so convincing. Whereas I heard that it is in Buddhism which explains about the self, not necessarily so objective, but on the basis of designation. The concept of continuation, the concept of, the self as an entity, not necessarily, something which is so pointable there from the object side. So, can you help me with this? So this is the question that he, came up with to His Holiness in the form of a request mail. And then of course, His Holiness, how can he really, how can we expect him to give replies to all of these questions? So there are, hundreds and thousands of such questions coming to His Holiness. So the secretary of His Holiness, he simply diverted it, and then he told the person, contact me, contact Dorji Damdul. So then he wrote to me, again putting the same question, and then we had a very good meeting, whole 1 week meeting in South India, and he is really ardent and enthusiastic, scientist, and so curious, so open-minded. And then what he's interested in is that what is found in Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy, not found in modern science. What is that? The concept of designation. From Buddhism, everything comes into being through mere mental designation. Whereas in science, instead of designation, there should be something pointable there. And then, in the course of you believing that everything should be something so 100% objectively existent, then you are trying to get rid of, you are trying to ignore so many realities. So therefore science becomes so incomplete even now. And luckily, quantum mechanics is now coming up, and because of which, quantum mechanics is including the subjectivity, the observers, the observer, these elements of the observer to explain the objects. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that in Buddhism, the beauty of Buddhism, which makes it a complete system, which explains things so beautifully, is inclusion, its ability to include the subjective imputation to account for the existence of something. Right. Okay, so from Buddhism, the mind, as she's saying, you know, the mind is not separate from, the self is not separate from the mind. Nor the mind is the self. No. What is self then? Self is simply, you know, what comes to your mind, on the basis of the body and the mind that you have. Simply a designation. Designation connotes not really from the object side. If you go to look at the object side, you don't find the self. Because it is a designation. So what you find, if you look at, you know, where are you? I might say, I'm here. Actually, this is your chest. This is not me. You know, if you go too close towards the self, then you end up finding just the constituents of the self and not the self. Right. So what is self? Self, therefore, since that the self is not pointable objectively, it is a designation. You know, object versus a designation. So it is just a mental designation, contrary or as opposed to the objective reality. And the self is not exception. Everything, just as the self is not findable objectively, and it needs to be posited subjectively. Likewise, everything that exists, including the Buddha, including Choe, Ling, Bangalore, everything exists in the same fashion. You know, just mental designation as opposed to something pointable there objectively. Right. Okay. Now, yes.
If there is no self, then who is that?
There is self.
So, is it then the aggregation of all the six elements? That's the
Very good question. There is self. There is self. So therefore, right from the beginning, I told you, you know, it's not you, everyone. I want you. In future, if it ever comes to your mind that self is non-existent, you are equating the non-existence of the self and the non-existence of the objective self. You remember that? You retrieve what is there in your brain, what you learned two days ago. Emptiness of objective existence and nothingness. Don't equate the two. Right. So what you are doing now, I'm not saying that you are deliberately doing it. This is the tendency of us when you're first introduced to this, you know. You first learn, oh, emptiness doesn't mean nothingness, you know, you learn so much about it. And then in the course of studying, in the course of reflection, then you end up saying that if there's no self, then what is the problem? You know, what is that thing? How do I account for that? So again, relapsing to the old belief that if something does not exist objectively, it means nothing is existent. So this is the flaw. This is the position of the lower schools, and which led to the problem. Okay, now her question. Okay, I'll take, put your question again.
If everything is separate from the self, then the self isn't a seventh element, but an aggregation of the six elements. Is that
okay? So what is said there? Okay, in the second last stanza, it says, if the person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not also consciousness, and not all of them, even the aggregate is not the aggregation of, you know, all these constituents is not the self. It's not me, it's Arya Nagarjuna already said it, right?
Are we speaking of conventional sense of self and absolute sense of self? They are different?
Okay, when you go to a shop, oh, can I get a biscuit? Or can I get a bread? Don't say that, oh, can I get a conventional bread? Right. Okay, so be as natural as, you know, you are. So this understanding of emptiness should not really make you crazy in shops. Right. Right. Okay. Instead, it should conform to the conventionality. Right. Okay. So the self is the self. So if you ask me which self, then you are making it very clear. Then I will say the conventional self. There is no ultimate self. Right? I'll make it very clear. Otherwise, in the convention, in a regular convention, there is the self. The self does exist, but the self does not exist objectively. This is how I would put. Right. Okay. Now, anyone who can, you know, she's not happy with, you know, Arya Nagarjuna when he said that not the aggregation of all these elements is the self. So anyone who can help me? Yes, over there?
can give an
Are you going to help me or are you going to argue against me?
No, I'll try to give an example.
Okay, good.
Suppose we are traveling in the bus,
Yeah.
it's really hot. Okay, and then your mind thinks like, oh, it's really hot and I'm suffering. You imagine that you're suffering because of the sun and you're traveling in a bus, it's very crowded. Okay, and that moment you saw a person who is taking a load and he's running in the sun. And then your mind, it changes how you perceive that thing. Like, that person is running in the sun, and what suffering you are exaggerating is actually very less compared to what he's suffering. And then a shift in the mind changes how we perceive the suffering also. So I feel...
So what did you say? Are you against me or are you are you support of me?
So I'm supporting you.
I see, okay. That was very philosophical. I don't understand what you said. Okay, anyway, thank you. Change your perspective, you know. Change your perspective helps you remove your suffering. Very good. Okay, now you want to say to help her or to help me? Both. Very good. Okay, tell me.
Recently, Dr. V.S. Ramchandran got a Nobel Prize for proving there is a designator, there is a conscious reallocator in the body. He proved it in 2 ways. He got the Nobel Prize last year. One is the phantom limb theory. If a limb is not there, a portion of the mind still receives and sends the messages to the limb as if it is there.
And sense it.
Then second way, what he proved is, that portion which was controlling that limb earlier, some designator again will take over and reallocate.
Absolutely. So when that part is destroyed, you know, the same work will be taken over by another part of the brain.
There is a conscious designator inside this system.
No, actually this is actually proof against that. Because you know, they say that
He got a Nobel Prize for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So therefore I'm saying that what he's saying is in proof of the absence of such a concrete, you know, a central agent there. Right. Okay, now are you happy with those answers? Not really. Okay. Yes.
I'm wondering if it helps for us to think of self as merely a creation of the mind which arises because of the mind and the aggregates.
Absolutely.
And because it's a creation, so that...
No, she's saying that she has no problem against it. She's so happy. I could see, you know, her face gleaming, you know, glowing with joy. But she's not happy when, you know, when we say that the aggregate of the elements, total, you know, aggregation of all the parts, is the self. It's not the self. When you say that, she's not happy. So anyone who can help with that.
So recently some surgery that is done.
What reason? The surgery in these things, you know, helps you. Okay, do you think we can help her?
Yeah.
Okay, make sure that you understand something or what he's saying.
In that surgery, a person's blood is completely removed, all the blood out of him for a few seconds.
Okay.
And they injected new blood into him to remove the
Very
germs.
good point, yeah.
So the complete one element, the blood is completely removed from the body.
Absolutely.
From him. So without him also he is there. Without
Absolutely.
that blood.
Very good, very good. Thank you, thank you. You must be a great philosopher and thinker. Oh, you're able to relate the everyday scientific findings into this philosophical arguments. Very good. Okay. So when there is a table, his point is very strong. You know, when you take out the blood completely from the body, the element of not really 100%, you know. Okay, so whatever. Just let's make it very simple. Take the blood out, which means the element of water is now missing. You know, still the person is there, right? And you put in a very short period of time, you put in the fresh blood. So the aggregate is lost, but the self is there. Then you put another, blood, and a new aggregate is there, but the self is the same. You know, it's not that, oh now, who am I? You will not say that, When the new blood is put in, there's a new aggregate. If the aggregate is the self, then just as there's a new aggregate, there should be a new person. Are you Dorji? No, I'm not Dorji. You know, you have to see like that. But this is not the case. Then he remembers everything of the past, and he or she acts the way he or she does usually. Okay, this is a very good point. Then another point would be like, for example, very similar to, yeah, okay, his point is very strong, this is it. Yeah, for example, you think of, you think of yourself, and you have a toothache, and you remove one tooth, the self, is it still there or not? But the aggregate is lost. Right. So the self is there. It doesn't mean now that I become a part, I become half self. You cannot say that. Right. But in terms of the aggregate, something is lost. Okay, so like that, we give more thought. Now back to what Narima asked yesterday, and then this is what I already explained, and this is so well presented here. The last stanza. Just as a person is not truly existent, because of being an aggregation of the 6 constituents, so each constituent also is not truly existent, as there are aggregations of their own constituents. Right. Okay. So what we do is that we memorize these stanzas, these 2 stanzas, and also if you could see stanza 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, stanza 5, stanza 5. Neither the aggregates, nor different from the aggregates. The aggregates don't depend on him, nor is he dependent on them. The Tathagata does not possess the aggregates. What is the Tathagata? Now replace that with your name. For example, neither the aggregates, meaning that your aggregates, how many aggregates are there? So the same analysis can be done from different angles. One, by deconstructing the self, into the 6 elements. Another, deconstructing the self into 5 aggregates. So the 6 constituents we already did. Now, how do you deconstruct the self into 5 aggregates? Again, this self, we see that, broadly speaking, we see that the self is constituted of the body and the mind. Right, the 2 things. Or you can break that further into 5, 5 aggregates. So the body that we have, we call it the element of the aggregate of the body. And the mind, we divide that into 2. The consciousness and the mental factors. So the consciousness is like the general experience of the mind. Oh, I'm happy today, or oh, I feel a little bit tired today. So this sense of, this mind in general is known as the consciousness. Now, within this mind, we see that there are finer details in terms of the functions of the mind. For example, is there Bangalore University? Okay, Bangalore University. Oh, I'm from Bangalore University. Very general. Then you say, which department you are from? Oh, Department of Science. Okay, which Department of Science? Physics. So like that, when you speak about I'm from Bangalore University, it's very general, Likewise, when you say I'm happy, my mind is very happy today, it's very general. Now you go in detail as to which department are you from. You try to make the, that thing so refined and, into fine detail. So say, my mind is so happy. Why? Why are you so happy today? Oh, because I've realized emptiness this morning. I realized. So there is this element of the realization, the mind having the quality, having the function of realization, one. And the mind's, and because of which I feel so happy. The feeling is there, the function of feeling. The function of feeling. But when I reflect on the emptiness, my mind is always going to the supermarkets. This is distraction. Again, the mind is also the function of distraction. So there are so many of such functions. So, in Buddhism, all these functions, somehow they are grouped into 51 functions. On the basis of these 51 functions, we gave 51 departments. And these departments are referred to as the mental factors. So how many mental factors? 51 mental factors. What is the Bangalore University like? It's a consciousness. The consciousness is like the Bangalore University. And each of these departments, they are, the mental factors. Right. So the mind can be divided into consciousness and the mental factors. And the consciousness we put as a different aggregate, the aggregate of consciousness. Right. So how many aggregates already? No. Aggregate of body, aggregate of consciousness. You know, we are looking for 5 aggregates, not looking for 50 aggregates, right? 5. So aggregate of body is finished. The body that we have, we call it the aggregate of form. And the mind, you know, mind, I'm not speaking about the mind in terms of consciousness, mind in terms of the aggregate. I'm trying to break that further. Right. So the mind, you break it into 2. What are they? Consciousness and the mental factors. So the consciousness, again you put it as a different aggregate, the aggregate of consciousness. So how many aggregates now? 3. So now what is left? Mental factors. So how many mental factors are there? 51. Of the 51 mental factors, there are 2 important mental factors which are closely related to our daily lives. Number 1 is the feeling. You know, oh, I'm feeling happy. I'm not feeling happy today. So forth, you know. So the mental fact. So out of 51, the feeling is one of the important mental factors. So that you give a different name, mental factor of feeling. How many mental factors now?
3.
Oh, sorry, how many aggregates are there now?
4.
What are they? The aggregate of body of form and aggregate of consciousness, aggregate of feeling. Okay. Now, how many mental factors left? 50 left. Out of the 50, no. Out of 51, 1 is gone. Feeling is gone. Now, how many left? 50. From 50, there's another important mental factor, the mental factor of discrimination, which means, oh, right now it's daytime. You know, there's no need to put on all these lamps, all these lights. It's daytime. So you know whether it is daytime or nighttime. You are able to discriminate. You are able to distinguish. So this is such an important mental factor, you know, which governs the quality of your life. So therefore, this discrimination, mental factor of discrimination, is given a separate, you know, a name as an aggregate of discrimination. So how many aggregates gone now? 4 gone. Now how many mental factors left now? 49. So these 49 mental factors, you know, you put them into one group and call it aggregate of compositional factor. Aggregate of compositional factor. Compositional factor simply means something which is composed of parts. That's it. You know, composed of parts other than the feeling, discrimination, consciousness, and the body. Right. Okay, so these are 5 aggregates. Now look at yourself. Whenever you associate yourself with any kind of function, any kind of, you know, the feelings, any kind of thing that you are doing or you like or you dislike, just see, you know, what within your body, within yourself is connected with. You see, the idea is connected with your body, primarily with your body, or with your mind, or with your feeling, or with your discrimination. You say that, oh, emptiness is, you know, emptiness is so easy to understand. And someone says, no, you're telling a lie. You don't know what emptiness is. It's so difficult, you know. It is for this reason that Buddha remained for 9 days silence. So how can you expect to understand emptiness just within 3 sessions? Right. So you may argue like that. So this is on the basis of discrimination. Right. This mental factor of discrimination. So likewise, compassion. You know, you have a mental feeling of compassion, empathy, jealousy, and so forth. All these, you know, they are somehow connected with the mental factors, and which are, you know, if not the feeling and discrimination, then they belong to the aggregate of the composition factor. Okay. So now, how do you go about, you know, doing the analysis? Again, in the meditation, you know, just as you did with the 6 elements, now you do with the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates, primarily my body and mind, you know, 1 aggregate of the body and the 4 aggregates of the mind. Right. Okay. So my body is not the self, you know. So here, the 5th stanza. Are you all looking at it? The 5th stanza. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Neither the aggregates, meaning none of these 5 aggregates is the self. Number 1. Number 2, no different from the aggregates. the self is not again separate from these 5 aggregates. The aggregates don't depend on him because there's, because there is no self distinct from these aggregates. It's not like that, I feel so tired, I need something to rest on. Then I depend on the pillow. I depend on the pillow. Because I and pillow, these two are simultaneously there. But when you break down the self, what you find is just these 5 aggregates, and the self disappears. So because the self disappears on that level, we cannot point to 2 things. One as, dependent, one which depends on the other, and the other is on which the other thing depends. So since there are no 2 things, when you go into the picture of the Mahatma Gandhi, you see the dots. And the Mahatma Gandhi is not holding any of these dots. Is he holding these dots or not? Because these constitute the Mahatma Gandhi, and how can you expect, a separate Mahatma Gandhi holding these dots, pointing to these dots? Right. Okay, likewise, when you break yourself into the 5 aggregates, then on that level, when you look at the 5 aggregates, my body, my body, my mind, and within my mind, the mental aggregates, the consciousness, when you go to that level, then the sense of the I or the self disappears. It's not findable there, right? It's not findable there. You just end up finding the 5 elements, the 5 aggregates, right? So because you only end up seeing the 5 aggregates and not the self, so how can you say the self is dependent on that? Because there is no self there, and if you're just alone in this house, is it that someone else in this house is dependent on you? No, because you're just alone. To say that there's a dependency, there should be 2 things. Right. One which is depending on the other, and the other on which the other is dependent. So there should be 2 things. But whereas when you speak about the self and the 5 aggregates, when you go into the aggregates, you only see that they are the 5 aggregates and the self is not perceivable. The self does not exist in that domain. So how can the self be dependent on the 5 aggregates? And how can the 5 aggregates be dependent on the self? And how can that self have the 5 aggregates? Because there's just a 5 aggregates. Okay, so what is being said here? Neither the aggregates, this is the first point. None of these, what you find when you, where are you? I'm here. Actually, this is your body, it's not you. What are you thinking of? I'm thinking of emptiness. This mind which thinks about emptiness is not the self. Right. So none of these aggregates is the self, number 1. Number 2, no different from the aggregates. You take aside all the 5 aggregates, the self again does not exist as distinct. Number 2. Number 3, the aggregates don't depend on him. These 5 aggregates, on that domain, on that level, when you only end up finding where are you, when you only end up finding the 5 aggregates and not self, because there is no self findable objectively there, the aggregates don't have anything to depend on as the self. And nor the self is dependent on these aggregates, on that level. Then the Tathagata, actually the analysis done, Arya Nagarjuna is doing the analysis in relation to the Buddha, the Tathagata. The Tathagata does not possess the aggregates. It is as though you just end up finding the 5 aggregates, and the self does not exist from the object side. So there is no possessor which possesses the 5 aggregates. So the Tathagata as the self does not possess the aggregates. So what is the Tathagata? Or where is that Tathagata? So this, when you see that, oh no, the Tathagata or the self, which earlier I perceived, it is not really there. You are not saying that the self does not exist. You are saying that the self is not findable from the object side. So this is the meaning of the emptiness from the object side. The emptiness of the objective self. Right. So this is emptiness. Okay. Okay. It's on page 9. Page 9, which says, I'm going to simply quote it. So don't worry about whether you have the book, it's good. If not, don't worry. It says, all compounded things are impermanent. So basically, the Buddha is talking about the 4 seals. The 4 seals of the Buddha's teaching. Number 1, all compounded things are impermanent. Number 2, all contaminated things are of suffering nature. Number 3, everything is of the nature of emptiness and selflessness. Number 4, transcending sorrow is absolute peace and nirvana. Right. So the first line says, all compounded things are impermanent. And the self is also compounded things. Self is also constituted of impermanent things. It is also made of the body and the mind. The body is impermanent, the mind is impermanent. So therefore the self as well, being compounded by, impermanent things, it should be also impermanent. All compounded things are impermanent. So which means, just as the body and the self, they are changing, the self is also changing. Right. So now the earlier argument is that when she is saying the aggregate, coming together of all the aggregates is the self. If this is argument, then how would you, but this is not the reality. So how can you convince that this is not real? In the sense that the aggregate of these, the congregation of these aggregates is not the self. How can you say that? So it is simply to prove that. I'm not saying that the self is permanent. The self is impermanent, while the self is always there. Self is always there, but still the self is impermanent. There is no contradiction between the two, right? So when you take out the blood, for example, in a complete blood, the aggregation is lost, but the self is there. I'm not saying that the self is permanent. The self is there, right? Self is there, is continuously existing in the process of changing. For example, self, me, have been existing since, many years ago. And every year there's change in my body, there's change in my mind. Every day there's change in my body, there's change in my mind. So just as the body, and there's a change in the, change in the body earlier, like 40 years ago, I was just a small baby, Now the body gains size. So we said, now he's no more baby, right? So the self, I am baby, I am not baby, so these are all, there is a change happening in the self. But still, whether you are a 1-year-old boy or girl, or whether you are a 20-year-old boy or girl, the self is always there. Right, the self is always there. So while the self continues altogether, yet it continues, the process of continuation is done through changing. Okay. Now the first stanza. Yes, quick.
So when it continues to change, right?
Yeah.
When ultimately Buddha, when you achieve the nirvana,
Yeah.
then it becomes permanent.
Not really permanent. Permanent connotes unchanging. Even after achieving Buddhahood, there is a change occurring. But it doesn't mean changing from Buddhahood to again suffering. No. Changing from one state of Buddhahood to another state of Buddhahood, still to another state of Buddhahood. Like, happy person today, tomorrow also happy, day after tomorrow also happy, always like this.
Is it happier?
Not happier in the case of Buddha, because he has already reached the happiest state. Okay, now let's go. The first stanza. It says, now this, on top of the last 2 stanzas, in your meditation, on a daily meditation, on the daily basis, you use the last 2 stanzas plus the stanza 5, which is neither the aggregates and so forth, and then finally you add this, the first stanza, as a kind of sealing, giving a seal to what you have reflected on. The various delightful flowers blossom, and the sparkling supreme golden abodes stand alluringly. They have no creator at all. They are apposited by the power of thought. Through the power of conceptualization, the world is imputed. So this is what the Buddha said. Right. So from what we have reflected earlier, by using Arya Nagarjuna's precious garden 2 stanzas and 1 stanza from Arya Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom of the middle way, we think about the self and then see, how the self originally earlier appeared, and now how that self does not exist as it appeared earlier. Looking for this discrepancy, the gap. So when you see that the earlier version of the self, which you earlier thought the self exists in that way, when you see that this is no more there, this understanding is known as the emptiness of the self. But don't think that if something is coming to your mind, it's so good, but it's a beginning. It's a beginning. It's not really the full story. I'm not going to discourage you, but to give you a clue. Otherwise, you might end up, getting some kind of experience on a very crude, basic level, and you think that this is the full story of emptiness. So, in this kind of understanding can be on various layers and levels. To give you just broadly 5 levels. Number 1, emptiness of permanent unitary independent self. Number 1. This is very coarse, very gross. Let me repeat that. Emptiness of permanent unitary independent self. Number 2, emptiness of autonomous substantial self. Number 3, emptiness of external self. External self. Number 3. Number 4, emptiness of true self. Number 5, emptiness of objective / independent / intrinsic self. Okay, I don't want to go more. Right. Emptiness of what? Objective / independent / intrinsic / inherent self. Okay, so look, these,
Can you please repeat one thing?
Say it again. The 5th one. The last one. The last one. All. Okay. Number 1, emptiness of permanent unitary independent self. Number 2, emptiness of autonomous substantial self. Number 3, emptiness of external self. Number 4, emptiness of true self. Number 5, emptiness of objective / independent / intrinsic / inherent self. Okay, at least there are 5 layers. So these are what you find explicitly taught in the different Buddhist texts. Right. So because of the reflection that I've given you now, and then you do that on a daily basis, and then all of a sudden you get a kind of illumination. Oh, the self does not really exist the way it appears to me. It's really not there. I'm totally deceived. If not since beginningless time, at least since birth, I'm deceived. Oh, that's not really there. The world is very different from how it appears to me. It might come to you, and then you might think that, oh, this is what Arya Nagarjuna meant by emptiness. This is what the Buddha meant by emptiness. No, this is such a basic understanding. So to really understand, to see whether your understanding reflects the ultimate level of the emptiness or something very coarse, try to study these 5 levels. These 5 levels of emptinesses. And then see, these 5 you use as a frame of reference. A frame of comparison. And then you see, try to gain some kind of experience through such reflections. And then whatever experience that you gain, then see whether it fits into the first level of emptiness or the second level of emptiness and so forth. And then if it fits into the second, you have still, 3 more levels to go. And if it fits on the third, you still have like fourth and fifth to go. For example, of my friend over there, he is, during the break time, he is bringing about the issue, or something about his friend, one of the friends, psychologist, who also says that there is no really table as such. It's just perception. So I told him that this is not really what is explained here in this text. So that goes more in line with the third emptiness. Emptiness of what? External self. There is no external reality. It's just your mind. Still, it's just the third. It's not the fourth, not the fifth. So there are more, steps to go ahead. Okay. So this is how we ought to be doing meditation, and then see if you gain some kind of experience of this. And once you gain experience, and then try to relate this with your day-to-day emotions. For example, your excessive attachment to someone, or you feel angry to always fighting with your neighbors, or problem with your colleagues, or problem with your house. Whenever there's some kind of problem, always relate to it whether that problem arises from the misperception of seeing the object as so objectively, and then try to see the object that is there with the encounter of which there's negative emotions arising in you. Then try to analyze how the object exists. Whether the object exists the way it appears to you and giving you anger, giving you attachment, or it exists in a different way as a pure subjective imputation. Just analyze that, and then if you're successful, of course it's not going to happen to you overnight. If you're successful, then in some cases, like within weeks, within months, and some cases like me, within many years, only after many years, something simply strikes your mind. Oh, this is it. It really doesn't exist the way it appears to me. So what a great deal. So why there's no point in me generating anger. It is as though like I'm angry towards my own dream. I'm feeling attached towards my own dream pizza. There's something like that, come in you. And then you become so stable in your, personality. When you come across situations where anger can be ignited, you remain so calm and peaceful. Instead of anger, coming into arising, you not only you control it, you can arise compassion towards the person igniting anger towards you. And because of which the other person sensing that, oh, he should have become so angry, but instead he's retaining incredible compassion towards me. Who on this earth can do that? And he's doing it. He's so great. And then he surrenders. When he surrenders, there is no anger. Anger dissolves. Even from that person. Not only that you help yourself, saying no to anger, you also help the other person dissolve anger. And then it's like a chain reaction. Then when you sense that the person dissolves his anger, that the person submits or surrenders to you, there's even a greater flow of compassion. There's even a great flow of affection towards the other person. So there's a real harmony coming about in the whole community, in the whole family, in the community. So this is how you enrich your compassion. You enrich your sense of joy. Sense of joy. Same, when you see your mother, there's a tremendous sense of joy in you. Why? Because you see a connectivity. You see a flow of compassion from the other side towards you. Then when you see your father and mother, there's a greater joy. Because there are two people giving you joy. There's a greater joy. When you see a neighbor in the same light, there's three joys coming to you. When you see the entire 6 billion human beings on this earth in the light of, that connectedness, that affection, you see that there's 6 billion joys coming in you. And then if you can expand this towards all other sentient beings, including the tiny, poor little insect, mosquito, who lands on your body, and coming to the blood. Of course, there is danger of dengue problem, you know, of course. But instead of eating like this, you know, just simply blow it gently with a prayer. Om Mani Padme Hum. Blow it. You know? So that way, you will have a sense of joy coming in. So imagine how many joys coming in you. You know? So this is what is known as infinite joy. The joy which finds no border. Everyone, there is no demarcation between you as Buddhist, others as non-Buddhist, or you as Hindu, others as non-Hindu, you as Indian, others as non-Indians. No, there is no border at all. I imagine if Mahatma Gandhi and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, if they, two of them, sit together, I don't think they would ever have a feeling of, I'm Indian, I'm Tibetan. They would have a feeling of brotherhood. Now look, I have a friend here, a brother here, who can help me to uplift all the humanity, all the sentient beings from suffering. Right. So this is the kind of thing. What we are seeking is happiness. In real sense, the happiness comes from compassion. You know, if you're able to share compassion with one person, there's one joy. If you're able to share this compassion towards all sentient beings, there is infinite joy in you. What you are seeking is infinite joy, and contrary to that, you are destroying your own joy by ignoring compassion towards others. By holding grudge, hostility towards others. You are destroying your own happiness. Right. So the point here is that first you destroy anger towards your enemy. How? View the enemy, examine the enemy, how the enemy exists. Whether he or she exists the way he appears to me as so objectively there, or just aggregates. The body alone will not show any anger towards you. And the mind has a dream element, the dream mind, and the waking sleep mind, and the waking state mind. Even the waking state mind has many segments. So no way you can point to the mind saying that this is the one which creates problem on me. So if you look at in that prospect, in that perspective, from that perspective, we see that there is no tangible object located, to point to and say that this is my enemy creating problem. Right. In fact, the person is causing problem on you because of the ignorance of viewing you as so objectively existent. It is his ignorance. And now you have learned about these things. It is wrong on your part to blame the other person who has not learned about these things. You have learned about all these reality, ultimate reality, emptiness, and so forth. Now it should be you who should be starting the negotiation. Because you have learned about this. You should be feeling pity. You should wish that the other person has also learned all these beautiful teachings. Right. And then you dissolve the objective reality of the other person. Because of which you see that there is no target as such, on whom you can feel angry towards. So anger dissolves. When your anger dissolves, the other person could sense it. Once the other person senses it, then the other person surrenders. You will disarm or will unarm his anger. No anger in his hand. So he is also peaceful. So when you sense the peace in him, there's a joy coming in you. So if you're able to expand this joy even to your enemies, it becomes so easy for you to share this joy with all other sentient beings. To the extent of the number of the sentient beings that exist there, to whom you show your affection, love, seeing the ultimate reality as it is, to that extent you get the joy, the amount of joy. And this is what is known as the lasting joy, which finds no border, which finds no anger. Right. Okay, so these all trigger, these all come forth, stem forth from the perfect realization that there is no target for any anger to arise. There is no objective reality on the basis of which, what usually arises anger. Now there is no anger. There is no room for the anger to arise. Because for anger to arise, it is because anger is a disturbing emotion. It should be rooted on the ignorance, which views things as intrinsically real. And now you have realized that there is no intrinsic real. There is no objective real. It's just your own mind. It's just dreamlike, you know. It's so stupid on your part when you come out of your dream and still adhere into the dream and saying that I want that visa, I want that visa. It's foolish. So like that, you know, your anger will find no room to arise in you once you realize that there is no objective enemy, objectively existent enemy. Right. Okay. So like that, gradually your sense of attachment, excessive attachment, will also dissolve, seeing that there is no objective, you know, objectively existent attractive phenomena there. So this attachment also dissolves. When the obsessive attachment dissolves, then you truly find a relief of your mind. Because the obsessive attachment is what invites all problems. Right. You want to get a car, beautiful car, rosary car, and you earn so you just sweat, and work so hard. Finally, after 40 years, you get a car, you know, and then the car had accident, and you heartbreak, and you die. You know, death is caused because of the car, you know, because of your excessive attachment, for which you worked so hard for the last 40 years. This attachment, excessive attachment, you know, negative attachment. So of course there are two things: positive attachment and negative attachment. The negative attachment, which are all based on this ignorance, is the one which is like a magnet, which attracts all problems, which welcomes all problems. Right. So why don't we say no to this attachment? You know, how do we go about saying no to this attachment? Is by seeing the reality as it is, through wisdom. So Buddhism encourages all practices of compassion, all practices of shamatha, vipassana, and so forth, grounded on this wisdom, grounded on, you know, the wisdom which realizes the reality as it is, instead of grounding on blind faith. Okay. I think the time is up. And let's see. Okay, we are still on stanza 8. Perhaps we can go through quite fast now. Stanza 8. The Buddha's teaching of the Dharma is based on two truths: a truth of worldly convention and an ultimate truth. So the worldly convention is the, you know, the conventional reality, and the ultimate truth is, you know, what exists beyond this conventionality, nothing. So the nothingness or the emptiness of what exists beyond this conventionality is the ultimate truth. The next stanza, stanza 9. Those who do not understand the distinction drawn between these two truths do not understand the Buddha's teaching of the profound suchness. Right. So the practice, you know, there are people who always speak about practice, always saying like, you know, the intellectual learning is something so poisonous. Without practice, what is use of intellectual learning? Of course they are right, of course. Of course they are right. But without the intellectual learning, that practice becomes blind. You know? So always bring them together. Don't say that the intellectual learning is, of course, you're looking at it as so personal, so dry. No. This must be there. So if you don't believe in me, at least you must have trust in Arya Nagarjuna. So what he said here, those who do not understand the distinction drawn between these two truths do not understand the Buddha's teaching of the profound suchness. Right. So look at this. So always there must be a combination of the complementarity of these two things: intellectual inquiry, then putting that into reflection, then transforming that into the meditation. You know. Otherwise, simply talking about practice. It is as though, like, you know, you have already reached to the summit of the practice without having to learn all these complicated philosophies. So that's really deceiving oneself. Right. Whereas if you do find someone, you know, with such an intellectual the inquiry and skill, and yet not at all interested in familiarizing what one has learned in one's practice, this is a sad story. Otherwise, intellectual learning is crucially required. It is indispensably required one's own practice. Okay, stanza 10. Without dependence upon the convention, the meaning of the ultimate cannot be expressed. Without understanding the meaning of the ultimate, liberation is not achieved. This is the point, you know. In future, if you ever encounter with anyone or within your own mind the feeling that, oh, the practice is more important, you know. Of course, this is right, this is not wrong, but not at the cost, you know, not at the cost of that intellectual learning, the rich intellectual learning. Okay, so what is being said here? Without dependence upon the convention, meaning that conventionality is so important. Because there is nothing existing ultimately. So the nothing exists ultimately is the ultimate reality, which you will come to know only through interacting with the conventional realities. Right. So first you have to say, oh, do things exist beyond the conventionality? You know, your analysis of the ultimate reality starts from there. Do things exist beyond the conventionality? Beyond is conventionality. Conventional reality is conventional reality. Is there something existing? Existent is also conventionality. So you have to depend on all these things in order to get to understand what is really beyond there. Right. So this is the meaning of, without dependence upon the convention or the conventionality, the meaning of the ultimate cannot be expressed or cannot be understood. Without understanding the meaning of the ultimate, liberation is not achieved. So this is the whole key. 11. Through misperception of emptiness, a person of little intelligence is ruined, like a snake incorrectly seized or like a spell incorrectly cast. Okay, so here, now look, there are two possible, dangers when you study emptiness. One might say, oh, for the last 4 days, I expected something so profound from him, and then I end up, him saying that there's nothing existent. What a stupid thing. Then you go out and you say the emptiness doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. If you go out like that, you are denigrating the profound concept of emptiness. Right. In that way, in fact, you are saying bye-bye to liberation. Right. When you say bye-bye to liberation, where are you fond of? You are fond of samsara. Right. Because, I like samsara pains. Right. So this is what is prone to happen if you don't understand emptiness well. If you think that emptiness connotes nothingness. Number one. Now the other danger is that, oh, emptiness is so great because my teacher said it. My teacher is an incredible teacher, and he talks about emptiness. There is nothing existent. Oh, don't worry about practice. There's nothing existing. If you know that there's nothing existent, this is liberation. Again, then you say that there's no Buddha, there's no three jewels, there's no karma, you can do anything you like. Then you fall into that run. This is another danger. Right. So make sure that you don't fall into either of the two dangers. Okay. So when you're trapped in one of these two dangers, it is like a snake incorrectly seized. What happens if you seize the snake from the tail? What happens? You're bitten, right? Okay. Or like a spell incorrectly cast. If you're a magician, if you are a black magician, if you try to cast some kind of spell on someone else, and if you can't do it properly, it'll fall on you. It can kill you. So like that, you try to learn about emptiness from this Choe to Ling, then you go out go out from this door. Oh, there's nothing existent. What a fun! Then you are actually catching the snake from the tail. Right. This is very dangerous. Okay, 12. For the reason that he knows this teaching to be difficult to fathom, the depths of the lesson and the depths by the less intelligent, the Buddha's mind turned away from giving teachings. Okay. 13. These refutations are not relevant to the advocates of emptiness. Your faults of denigration of emptiness do not hold true for me. So now Arya Nagarjuna is responding to the advocates of the intrinsic existence. 14. For him to whom emptiness is tenable, everything becomes tenable. For him to whom emptiness is not tenable, nothing becomes tenable. Saying that if you think that emptiness is not a proper philosophy, proper understanding, proper reality, then you adhere to intrinsic reality. You adhere to independent reality. You know, if you achieve the independent reality, independent existence, then you reject dependence. If you reject dependence, then you reject the causation, cause-effect relationship, because the results come into being by dependence on the causes. So if there is no phenomenon of dependence, then the results cannot arise from the causes. Right. For him to whom emptiness is tenable, everything becomes tenable. For him to whom emptiness is not tenable, nothing becomes tenable. 15. When you force upon us all of your errors, you are like a man who has mounted his horse and has forgotten that very horse. You know? So the advocates of the intrinsic reality, they are pointing to Arya Nagarjuna saying that you are denigrating Four Noble Truths and so forth. Actually, it is you, the advocates of the intrinsic reality, who denigrates the Four Noble Truths. You forget that part, you know, and you think that the fault is in me. In reality, it's reflecting your own fault. How? Okay, 16. If you perceive the existence of all things in terms of their self-nature, objective reality, intrinsic reality, they all mean the same. This existence of things you will have to view as absent of causes and conditions. 17. Effects and causes, and agent and action, conditions arising and ceasing, and effects will be rendered impossible. Because look, agent, action, and the subject. You know, for example, you say, oh, I'm a poet. I'm a poet. Say, you know, I'm a poet. Poet means, you know, someone who composes poems. So there should be a poem to be, you know, which is composed. There should be the action of composition. And there's a person who does the action of composition. Three things. Object, the action, and the agent, or the actor, or the subject. Three things. So without the poems composed, you are not a poet. And this action, whatever you are doing, this is not the action of composition, of a poem. And without the poet, what is done is not a poem. And the action is not a composition poem. And without this action of composing, there is no poem composed. And there is no actor who is the composer. So all these three things is not something that, you know, they are simply dependent in a linear fashion. Instead, they are mutually dependent. So independent of other factors, nothing really exists as an agent, as an actor, as an action, or the object on which the action is done. So therefore, these are all relative. There is no objective reality. There is no independent existence. 18. Whatever is dependent and arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. Now, what is the meaning of emptiness? It doesn't mean nothingness. It means dependent arising. Why? Emptiness is a full form of what? Emptiness of independent existence. So here, you reject independent existence, which means there is no independent existence, which implies there is dependent existence instead. Right. Dependent existence is the meaning of emptiness. Whatever is dependently arisen or dependently originated, that is explained to be emptiness. That being a dependent designation. And what does it mean by dependent origination? It means something originating, you know, by dependence on the designation, mental designation. That being a dependent designation is itself the middle way. It is not an extreme way, it is the middle way, you know, because it avoids nihilism as well as it avoids absolutism. 20. If all these were not empty, now Arya Nagarjuna, you know, look at stanza, now, you know, compare the two or contrast the two. Stanza 1 and stanza 20. You know, it's very interesting. Stanza 1 is the summation of the advocates of intrinsic reality, and stanza 20 is the summation of the advocates of emptiness of independent existence. So stanza 20 says, you know, if all these were not empty, and stanza 1 says, if all of this is empty, right? Okay, and the argument is set for the same, in the same fashion. If all these were not empty, there would be no arising and no ceasing. Then the Four Noble Truths for you would be non-existent. Right. If it is not dependently arisen, how could suffering come to be? Suffering depends on the causes of suffering. So, then impermanent, which suffering is thought to be, does not exist in its self-nature. And the Buddha said the suffering is of the nature of impermanence. So if there is no suffering in the first place, how can the suffering be impermanent? And the Buddha should be wrong, but this is not the case. It's all because of your belief that things should exist intrinsically and objectively. 22. Then when something does not exist from its own nature, how could it ever arise? It follows that if one denies emptiness, there can be no original of suffering. Okay, 23. If suffering exists as self-nature, again, self-nature means independent nature or objective nature, its cessation could not exist. It's so beautiful. If the suffering exists, objectively or independently, nothing can eliminate this. Nothing can really eliminate this. How do we go about eliminating the suffering? It is through eliminating the cause of suffering. Because there is no cause of suffering from their point of view, because there is no arising, because there is no dependence from their point of view. So the result, suffering should not depend on the cause. So there is no cause as such. If there is no cause as such, we cannot eliminate the cause. Without eliminating the cause, we cannot eliminate suffering. So the suffering cannot be eliminated. If that is the case, then the third truth, the cessation of suffering, is not possible. If suffering exists as self-nature, its cessation could not exist. So if self-nature is posited, one denies the third truth, the cessation of suffering. 24. If the path had self-nature, again the path, the fourth truth, if the path had self-nature or independent nature, meditation would not be tenable. Meditation connotes you don't know anything, you are not habituated to do that. Now you are going to habituate in that. This is meditation. So if the path is already there right from the beginning, then you're already evolved. So why should you meditate? So the meditation would not be tenable. If this path is indeed meditated, if you say that of course the path is to be meditated, then you have to give up your belief that the path exists independently. Your position of self-nature would not hold true. 25. If suffering the cause of suffering and cessation are non-existent, by meditation upon which path could one seek to obtain the cessation of suffering? Right. So now look, there is no the advocates of intrinsic reality cannot posit fundamental truths. If non-understanding comes to be through its self-nature, how will understanding arise? It's so beautiful, If non-understanding, meaning ignorance, if the ignorance exists objectively and independently, you can't do anything, to remove this, because it exists independently. It does not depend on any other factors. You can't change the factors to change this ignorance. So this ignorance cannot be, changed. It should always remain as, like that, ignorant. How will understand? If the ignorance always remains, then understanding the opposite of this ignorance, the wisdom cannot arise. As soon as the wisdom arises, the ignorance should disappear. But if the ignorance always remains, then there is no room for wisdom to arise. But in reality, we do see people, in whom the wisdom is arising. Doesn't it, exist by virtue of self-nature? This is the argument, 27. Just as the understanding of suffering is said to be unvisible, abandoning of the cause of suffering, actualization of what? Cessation of suffering, and meditating the path of cessation and the Four Noble Truths also would not be possible for you, the advocates of intrinsic reality. 28. For a propounder of self-nature, for a propounder of intrinsic nature, since the fruits which through their self-nature are not attained, in what way could one attain them? If there is no Four Noble Truths, there is no basis for you to practice. If you don't do any practice, you don't achieve the four fruits. Even the four fruits become insensible. 29. Without the fruits, there are no attainers of the fruits, nor the enterers. If the 8 kinds of persons did not exist, there would be no Sangha. From the non-existence of the Four Noble Truths would follow the non-existence of the true doctrine, because the true doctrine of the true Dharma is the third and the fourth Noble Truth. The third and the fourth Noble Truth. There is no real Dharma. Then, if there is no doctrine and no Sangha, how could a Buddha exist? 31. For you, it would follow that a Buddha arises not in dependence upon enlightenment. For you, enlightenment would arise not in dependence upon a Buddha. So say, actually, one becomes a Buddha through gaining the quality of enlightenment. So since, from their point of view, there is nothing existing dependently. There is no dependence. Everything should be independent, which means that even the Buddha should be independent of his quality of enlightenment. So you should possess someone without enlightenment. Someone as a Buddha without the quality of enlightenment. So this is really absurd. And likewise, enlightenment without any Buddhas. Right. 32. For you, in all those who are not Buddhas, due to his self-nature or inherent nature, enlightenment could not be achieved, even though the efforts in enlightenment practices to obtain enlightenment. Meaning that if you are not enlightened, you are very unfortunate. Now you cannot become Buddha anymore. From their point of view, because the way you are unenlightened or ordinary sentient being is so independently in that way, which means that no force can really change it. You are not dependent on any other factors, so you always remain unenlightened. Even though you spend years and years on practice, you cannot really achieve enlightenment. You always remain in the same nature, but it's not the case. So again, this is kind of argument against the ethical case of intrinsic reality. 33. Moreover, one could never perform dharmic and non-dharmic actions. Dharmic referring to something virtuous actions, non-dharmic referring to non-virtuous actions. Oh, don't do this, don't do slaving. This is non-dharmic. If you do that, in the next life, you will suffer poverty. Why? The next life's poverty is not at all dependent on this non-dharmic action of stealing. Because there is no dependence if everything is independent. So dharmic and non-dharmic actions also make no sense. Would make no sense if you believe in inherent existence. If this were all non-empty, what could one do? That with self-nature action does not exist. Then action in the first place will make no sense. Action connotes actor and the object on which the action is done. So only in relation to these three in a mutual dependency, action makes sense. So if everything does exist independently, even without the actor, there should be an action. This is totally what? Nonsensical. 34. For you, the fruit arises even in absence of dharma and non-dharma actions. You will be deprived of the fruits which arose from dharma and non-dharma actions. So either you have to say that, oh, never mind. Don't go to school. Don't go to university, colleges. You just think of becoming. So because you becoming a professor does not depend on your efforts. There is no dependency. Right. So if there is a professor, you can become randomly without any effort. Or you put all the efforts, but this will never give rise to professorship. Because the professorship is not at all dependent on your effort. You are doing something totally irrelevant to becoming a professor. Because your action and the professorship, these two have no relationship. There is no dependency if you believe in independent existence. 35. If for you a fruit arose from the dharma and non-dharma actions, then how would the fruit of dharma and non-dharma actions be non-empty? Now if you insist that, oh no, don't go to that extreme. We still believe that by doing wrong actions, you will have to account for that action in the form of negative, painful experiences. And if you do something good, you will have good results. Then give up the belief that things exist independently. There is dependency. So this is how Nagarjuna is rejecting independent existence. Okay, 36. If emptiness by virtue of dependent arising were denigrated, denigrate meaning you discard or you reject the emptiness in the form of dependent arising, that would contradict all worldly conventions. The worldly conventions, it is all based on the concept of dependent arising. So if you contradict or if you reject the concept of dependent arising, you cannot conform to the worldly conventions. 37. If emptiness itself is rejected, no action will be tenable. There would be action which did not begin. There would be an agent without action. 38. If they would be self-nature or independent nature, migrators or sentient beings would not arise nor uncease, and hence would assume a static state. You know, if you're a sentient being, you will always be a sentient being all the time. You will never be a Buddha. If you're a Buddha, you have never been a sentient being once, you know, in the former lifetimes. There would be absence of all varieties, meaning all varieties that we see around, a beautiful house, or a very ugly thing, you know, or the bright light, red light, all these things, you know, make sense only when there is a dependent origination. Beauty comes in dependence on something ugly, you know. Small makes sense only in relation to something bigger. So all these, you know, all these conventionalities, all these varieties of things, big, small, you know, and clean, untidy, and all these things make sense only when there is an interconnectedness, relativity, and dependence. So in the absence of dependency, you know, then you cannot really account for the diversity of the phenomena. Okay, 39. If the world were not empty, then the unachieved would not be achieved. If the world were not empty means non-empty. What? If the world were not empty, meaning if it does exist independently, you know, so those things that you have not achieved will never achieve. You will never achieve that. The act of ending suffering and abandoning afflictions would not exist. Because if you have suffering, it will always remain like that. You can't end the suffering. But in reality, you can end suffering. So if you believe in the concept that the suffering can be eliminated, you know, you have to give up the belief that things exist independently. 40. Whoever sees dependent arising also sees suffering, is origination, is cessation and path. So the Four Noble Truths make sense only to those people who see things in the light of dependency, in the light of emptiness of objective reality. Okay, so fortunately we're done with the, you know, all the stanzas. Now what I have here. Okay, now achieving greater degree of happiness, eventually achieving the full state of enlightenment. It is marked not on the basis of external things, it is marked on the basis of to what extent your mind is purified. If your mind is purified to 50%, you become an Arahant. If your mind is purified 100%, you become a Buddha. Right? So whether you, and on that basis, the degree of happiness also, you know, corresponds to that. So if you want happiness, you know, the secret of happiness is to cleanse your mind. Because the opposite of suffering, the opposite of happiness is suffering. And suffering is rooted to the ignorance. And the ignorance is not outside, it's within you. So if you don't want suffering, if you want happiness, do something with this ignorance. Eliminate that. To what extent you eliminate this ignorance, to that extent you will experience the happiness. Right. Okay. Now the point is, you know, if you want to achieve the greatest degree of happiness, it needs to be done. It needs to be done through eliminating the mental defilements, the mental stains. And the mental stains, say, just imagine, you want to, you know, a child, there's a 10-year-old boy, and who wants to become a professor in mathematics. But he's always found in the pubs. Always found in the pubs, you know, the nightclubs like that, and not at all, you know, doing the classworks. And for the next 20 years, he's always like that. And he's very brilliant, but always, you know, found in pubs, and has never attended one day of formal, you know, the attendance there in a college or in university. Do you expect this child to become a professor in mathematics? Very unlikely not. Sorry, very likely not. Very likely not. What is lacking in him? Is it the, you know, is it the intelligence he's lacking, or what is lacking?
Knowledge and discipline.
Discipline in the form of enthusiasm. determination. He said, oh, I want to become a professor. But in reality, whether he has this true determination or not is determined by, how much attendance he is getting there, in the pubs or in the college. Right. So, what he's lacking is the enthusiasm is lacking. And whereas there is another boy, or not a girl, a boy, because good thing with a boy and bad thing with a girl is also biased. So there's another boy who is really very enthusiastic, always there, 100% attendance. So enthusiastic. But he has already reached class 12, and his mathematical calculation is still 2 plus 2 equals 10. Do you think that he's going to become a professor, mathematics professor? Very likely not. What is he lacking? Is he lacking the enthusiasm? No. What is he lacking? Intelligence. So in order to accomplish that goal, to become a professor in mathematics, not only that you need intelligence, you also need enthusiasm. Not only the enthusiasm, you also need the intelligence. Both should go together. Likewise, which is more difficult, to become a professor in mathematics or to become a Buddha? No doubt, to become a Buddha is much more difficult. So in which case, out of all the intelligence, the best of the wisdom or the intelligence is required to achieve the Buddhahood. And out of all the enthusiasm, the best of the enthusiasm is required to achieve Buddhahood. Right. So what is that intelligence required to become a Buddha? What is that enthusiasm required to become a Buddha? So these two we need to check, we need to explore, and then once you gain confidence in what these two are, then our job is to go ahead with these two, without losing track of these two, without losing courage. Simply go ahead with this all the time. Fine. So what is that enthusiasm? What is the final enthusiasm required for that? So it is, say, oh, I want to, say, there are two mothers. Both are equally compassionate and affectionate towards, their children. One has 2 children to look after, and one has 10 children to look after. Right. And the situation is such that there's a drought. There's no food available around. So which means the children, they are really very suffering of hunger. And the mother, of course they are hungry, but their concern is more towards the children. Now imagine, which of the two mothers do you think will be more enthusiastic to go for food? The one who has to take care of just 2 children, or the one who has to take care of 10 children? 10. Why? Because the responsibility is more. It's not just 1, it's not just 2. It's 10. In fact, imagine, I came across one lady, Tibetan lady, and I went into her house, and she was just eating Maggi noodle, prepared, ready-made Maggi noodle. She's a mother of 2 children and husband. There is husband. So usually I saw her cooking all these delicious foods, varieties of foods. But that day I saw her just eating a very simple, 2 minutes noodle. Then in a very funny way I told her, oh, wow, a mother is enjoying a 2 minutes, noodle. And she said, oh, I don't like to cook for myself when I'm alone. Look, that kind of enthusiasm to cook food when she feels responsibility for more people, it really becomes alive. Whereas when she's just alone, the number is so less, the enthusiasm is less. So likewise, the enthusiasm will become so great, it becomes the greatest enthusiasm when you feel the responsibility for all sentient beings. It's not just one person, it's not just 10 persons, it's not just like a few millions of Indians, it's not just 6 billion human beings on earth, infinite number of sentient beings. When you feel the responsibility, for all these beings,